evening, everybody. I'm your host, Master R, and this is Out Young and Kinky, or white B-roll picking blessing out there. As always, I'm joined by my partners, Tom Jackson, Tom Edges, along with our panel of experienced kinksters. For those who are new to the event, Out Young and Kinky is a monthly kink social. You rotate through a different topic monthly. We do things a little differently here. We don't just host a general meetup. We actually get panelists in who are experts in their field to talk and share their wisdom, their knowledge, their experiences, their resources. That way you can take what you learn here and go home and be able to engage in something new in a slightly safer way. Tonight we're hosting a trans takeover. Oftentimes the voices of the trans community are overlooked, and the resources for young trans individuals can be challenging, if not impossible, to find and access. At OYNK, our Trans and Kinky event is dedicated to amplifying these stories through sharing the wisdom and experience of our trans and kinky panelists. We hope to foster education and understanding through their unique journeys. And without further ado, I'm going to shut my cis mouth up and hand the microphone over to Parrish for the rest of the night.
I'm Parrish, writer, editor, kinkster. I've been involved in IML for a while. And tonight I'm going to be hosting this panel, emceeing the panel on trans people's experiences in kink. We usually start these things with asking folks how they got started in kink and making connections with the larger kink community. For today's panel, I'd love you to A, introduce yourself, and B, talk about that, but also where that intersects in your journey with your trans identity. Marisol, do you want to start?
Hi, my name is Marisol. I use she, her pronouns. I am a Brooklyn-based spiritual advisor, drag artist, speaker, and writer. My kink journey began with my sexual awakening at like 11, 12. Immediately edging and piss play were part of my masturbatory practices, and I just thought that's how you did it. So I wasn't necessarily aware that it was kink at first. And then I made my way into the greater kink community about a little over 2 years ago was when I really like immersed myself. My awareness of my transness came earlier than that though. I was aware that I was a girl and that others would not believe that from kindergarten and in Catholic settings, and then later on in Catholic, mostly boys settings. So that was a very interesting like self-awareness to carry with. And then it was as an adult that I fused the two into conversation with each other.
And Zephyr, how about you?
I like to share the story that the first piece of leather I ever got, I was 4 years old in Uruguay. And I just had an absolute obsession with this like leather baseball cap. I probably should have worn it tonight, but you get the idea. It's a baseball cap, but it's leather. You still own it? Oh yeah, yeah. I hold on, the fuck onto that. Leather has been like a lifelong fetish, even before I knew that fetish had a sort of sexual connotation for me. I was obsessed with like boots, pants. There was like this full custom Argentine leather suit that was in the closet that I was hoping to one day lose enough weight to wear. Now I just buy my own. Gender-wise, I was kind of always doing this thing. I remember honestly, as early as elementary school, I'd be like, oh, I'm like half boy, half a girl. Because that was just the easiest way that I could express like how I understood myself to be, and I kind of just did my thing. The first time I heard the word transgender, I remember I was 15 years old at the table at lunch. It was one of those like somebody would sneeze and someone else would come up as some type of queer in my friend group in high school. But I heard the word transgender and speaking with my friend who was the first out in the group, a lesbian, and I was like, oh, I'd probably be like a bisexual trans guy. And then I proceeded to do nothing about that for a very long time. I knew there was something sort of queer about me, so I moved from California to New York because I needed about 3,000 miles of distance. in order to figure out anything about what was going on with myself. Quickly fell in with like a lot of queer punks. Realized that like I truly was non-binary. That was the best word I could find for it. Kink-wise, well, I was obsessed with like rock music, and if you know how they dressed in like the 70s with like all the leather and the tight jeans, like it never wore off for me. And then realizing that like, oh, I love it getting hit. I want to be tied up. I want to tie someone up, and just noticing that I would definitely say some of my biggest kinks would be bondage, impact, leather, rope, power dynamics, power exchange is a lot of fun. And just, slowly figuring that out.
I also realized that I very quickly threw it to y'all, and I'm also supposed to be participating in this panel.
Yeah, how does trans and kink matter for you, Parrish?
Similarly, I think kink was always part of my sexuality, and figuring out my sexuality, I knew I was attracted to men, but it felt gay, and trying to figure out what that meant was obviously a challenge. But I came out in high school when I was 16, and my first queer boyfriend and I also did rope stuff all the time, and we're playing with things in ways that we were both in the Scouts for years and years, so the basic knots. I now know knot style that they teach in the Scouts and knots that they teach you for adult fun time are slightly different things. But it's interesting because part of my journey has been being out and kinky and trans. Being an out gay trans man has gotten significantly easier in the last 6 years. And I did not feel like I could participate in kink community because I was not welcome. And I moved to New York about 9 years ago. And even then it took a while for me to find those connections. My main outlet was Craigslist, personal ads, and I'm so sad that we don't have those anymore because you could search by keywords. And so I would spell out exactly what I'm looking for, and people can be searching for their own keywords and find my post. That was by far where I had the most success for years, because Grindr was extremely hostile. And luckily Grindr has gotten better since we lost Craigslist, but there is a kind of irony to that. But speaking of kind of that queer community, one thing you did not bring up in your bio, Zephyr, is that you are Mr. Eagle. Can you speak
That is true.
Can you speak to why you chose to run for Mr. Eagle?
Yeah, so that's true. I am Mr. Eagle NYC 2025. I won in October. I would say last year I heard not too many people were running, and I was hanging out with a friend who was really getting into leather, and I was like, oh my god, you should just run. You should just run, dude. And I will go out there and support you and cheer you on. And he could have done better. He did not win. But while I was in there, I kind of got bitten, is what I would say, of I need to do this. This year is not my turn. I know I need literally more notches in my belt to figure out how I want to represent. And spent that year following my gut, following my nose, and decided that I should run. Public speaking is, I feel, a strength of mine. Y'all can tell me if I'm wrong. But I'm pretty good at getting up on stage and talking and being open on my queerness. I also thought that it was kind of fucked up that we hadn't had a trans Mr. Eagle NYC. I was like, well, might as well be me. I've been doctors or therapists or hookups first this, so I can do that again. That's my skill set. I just wanted to be able to represent how wide the community is and remind people that even if they haven't been admitting to it publicly, transmasculine people have been in the leather space the whole time. We've been getting fucked, we've been fucking, and we've been in this scene, whether it's been said or not. So I just wanted to be a bit louder about it and amplify some of that heritage, and also make it more possible for the next people. I want all the trans people who are oh, I don't know if I can go to the Eagle, to be oh, I can just go to the Eagle. Literally, Mr. Eagle is trans. Why not?
And it does become this cumulative effect. If I know that Zephyr's going to be there, I'm well, okay, so he's got to be a little bit chill. And then I'm there, and then someone finds out that I'm there, and we kind of builds on people finding which of these communities have an active trans presence and which do not. And I do think there's an interesting challenge for spaces that currently do not have an active trans presence but would like to make themselves more trans inclusive. What do you all feel is kind of the green flags that a space, a kink space specifically, is going to be a place that you're going to have a good time in?
For me, I need it to be an event that has vetting in place. There's way too many events where they're just kind of willy-nilly letting anyone in, and that certainly does not make me feel safe. So when I see that and I get to talk to the producers especially about like, what do these documents look like? What kind of questions are we asking folks before we allow them to purchase tickets to come here? And I'm satisfied with those and the thoroughness of that. That's one of my green flags.
Yeah. I find that interesting because some of that vetting I get red flags about because there are some types of vetting people do where you have to send in a photo. And I think there's a fairness to you have to be comfortable with sharing a personal bit of information, but so much of that shared photo becomes a beauty contest. Like, who are we allowing in? Do you look the right way we want to look in? So there is a balance to it.
I'm glad you brought that up. I have yet to encounter one that asks for that. So like, I'm kind of like, thank you for letting me know that that's even a thing. Please.
There is a sort of counter argument I've heard on the importance of sending a photo. Because there's definitely somewhere it's like they're looking for a certain body type or whatever. But there's also one that my partner told me about. Their roommate at the time worked at it. And it's like, we ask for a photo because sometimes they will send photos of themselves like slamming, which is injection drug use and sort of gay sex slang. Be like, look how fun I am. And it's like, okay, you're not passing the vetting test. So while it can be a beauty contest, or my bigger concern, very easy to have that information breached and have your business sort of spread about. Like, not everyone's going to get on a panel and say, hey, I'm trans and kinky, but someone's database might get hacked. That would be my bigger concern. When it comes to green flags, I've just kind of gotten to the point, it's like, I'm going to make whatever space I'm in safe, has been my attitude on it. That may not always be like the most secure method of going through, but I'm just like, I am here and I belong here because I am showing up in these ways. I never want like one little qualification of like why I should be allowed to be in a space. And also like, I'm a faggot. I would go places, my dick will take me places that my brain never would have.
I think that's interesting because my first like experience and I don't, this is one of those things where like, is it the variety of what describing people think is kinky and what is not? Just because it's a sex party, some people are like, that's not kinky, and some people are like, you would have sex with someone watching. But the first sex parties I went to were Inferno, New York City, because they, in their descriptions, very specifically said this is a party that allows everyone, but it centers the desires of queer men, which I think is a really good way of phrasing, like, we're trans inclusive, we're not going to be checking, because one of the things that comes up is there are parties that are like, oh, this is for women and trans people, and then someone who looks like me shows up, and they go, oh, you're a man, and it's like, well, but you said I'm trans people, and so any sort of that vetting at the door becomes really complicated.
Yeah, I take issue with the exclusion of men in these kind of spaces, especially as someone who's attracted to them. And I'm like, I want to go have a good old faggy time with some decent men. And I know plenty of trans men myself too that I would like to go. So I have a buddy also for these kind of spaces. And I've always had qualms with that. That actually makes me feel less safe when I see that they're policing certain genders out of the space.
Right.
I was trying to get at this. Like, I never want the fact that I don't have a natal dick. Why I'm allowed into his space, especially like we're pretty well passing.
Right. And it's like I also don't want to have to prove anything at the door in any direction, because one of the things that there will be people who hear this as audio only, so don't know what we look like. But I have had a past experience in the pandemic with people who were wearing masks all the time and people couldn't see my facial hair. And I went from passing 100% of the time to getting 50% sheet, which was a fascinating experience of like how do people perceive gender and in what space and based on what factors.
I would definitely say Inferno was also like some of my first sex parties. The first one I ever went to was actually Playhouse, which became what is now known as Transferno. But it was like, this is a gay sex party that is going to center trans dudes, but also everybody's welcome. Just understand, like, this is that space. Tonight, if this isn't your tea, we'll be back next month with our regular where everybody is welcome, but it's centering cis gay male desire.
Well, some of the thing about these spaces that I've seen at, like, someone asked me, like, what are the demographics of Transferno? And I was like, it's a bunch of naked trans people, and I can't tell what people's identities are when all I have to work with is nudity. And what's fascinating about that is it allows people to kind of connect and worry about the gender aspect of it later, but also it allows for a kind of freedom of expression that it doesn't really matter. And also, if you're in a dark room, like, the individual is less important than the, like, activities you're participating in. Which is one of the things that, when I was first coming out as trans, I've been in a lot of discussions about how trans people are disproportionately kinky, and part of that is the narrative I was told at the time was kink is a way for you to engage in sexuality that is not about bodies. It is about a narrative, it is about activities. Bondage is about having arms and legs and barely even that. You know, flogging is being able to feel sensations. It's not about what genitals you have, it's not about, and we can put whatever narrative on top of those activities that we want, and it becomes a very freeing experience to kind of separate out sexuality from the body, and in particular sensations from what society's telling us about our bodies. We're all taking a breather. Also remember that you can get a drink from the bar and refill because we
Tip your bartender.
tip your bartender.
Yes, and allow.
We are very grateful for Rebar for hosting us. So in that vein, I feel like we're headed this way. In kind of prepping for this conversation, we talked a little bit about spirituality. So, and I wrote this down, so I'm going to read a little bit because I wanted to make sure I reference things correctly. The first time I saw trans men in porn, I can identify, was the documentary Sexing the Trans Man, which I have critiques of, but it was produced with the intentional goal of sexualizing trans men. So it's a documentary that's like 50% porn and 50% interviews with the trans men in the porn. And it was about saying, like, trans men are attractive. Trans men can be sexy, have sexualities. And one of the subjects was a shaman and spoke about how, and his perspective is trans people are inherently divine, inherently spiritual leaders. There is a lot of narratives of that in various cultures. When I saw that documentary, it came out in 2011, I bristled because I was like, do not tell me I need to be actively spiritual and a leader in spirituality. And some of that comes from my grip Catholic, which has some very specific baggage, both in gender and in kink. So I'm kind of curious if we could talk a little bit about that intersection of spirituality and kink and transness.
Oh, that's where I live, baby. Okay, so background, I was raised Roman Catholic and Buddhist here in New York, and I went to Catholic school my whole life until college. Paired with, like, my kink sexual awakening when I was, a tween, one of the first orientations of my orgasms was God. And I would feel really, after the fact, I'd feel a little odd and even like, am I doing something wrong? What's going on here? And it wasn't until, I'm also a scholar of religion and a theologian. And so when I went on to study these things, I was pleasantly surprised. There's an entire mystic tradition of all these cis women in the Catholic Church, like, writing treatises about being God's bride and getting off to him and feeling these, and there's statues in the Vatican of, like, the ecstasy of Saint Teresa, like, in this orgasmic state with an angel over her. So, like, that made me feel seen in terms of, like, viewing sexuality as something to unify me back with godliness. And then, since then, I have become Hindu, and I am a Shaivite, and also an initiate of Tantra, which uses some of these things to get there. Although I will also say, most places that call themselves Tantric are neo-Tantric and have no presence of a guru at all, and are just deeply breathing while having sex with each other. And, like, that's not Tantra. And so it was when I met my guru about 3 years ago. And within 15 minutes of speaking with me over the phone, she very casually and matter-of-factly let me know, you do realize you're a walking Buddha already. And I was like, excuse me? And she offered me, admission to her community for free to study with them. And they had all started meeting a little before I met this woman. So I told her, oh, is there anything I have to do to catch up? And she said, no, actually, everyone else will be catching up to you because you would not be able to stand before me owning who you are if you did not already have access to universal truths that grant enlightenment. And that's where I really had it reflected back to me from someone who I consider ahead of me on the path, to be like, oh shit, there is this divine lightness in me that is so palpable to others on the path. I will also say it comes with a bit of a double-edged sword. Not everybody's prepared to be near divinity, and a bright light casts shadows. And I have found that when people come close to me, sometimes their shadows emerge by nature of being near me, and they don't know how to make sense of that. And it's easy to put the blame externally than deal with it internally in some cases. So I've also experienced that kind of double-edged side of it.
I guess one thing I can talk about, divinity and transness, is so in classical Judaism, there's actually more 6 genders. I forgot that we were going to talk about this, so I didn't look it up. But there's kind of an extreme masculine and extreme feminine, and a few shades in between. Some of them do talk about specifically genital variations, but there are different understandings of gender. I am Jewish. As in my father is, and then my mother is a shiksa, or a former shiksa, non-denominational Christian. And when it comes to Catholicism, I will say a confessional role play is fun. So if you don't have the trauma, check it out.
My actual first play party was at a friend's apartment, and it was Take Me to Church themed. And I was overwhelmed by the idea of just being at a sex party at all. I only hooked up with one person. It was a non-binary person dressed up like Jesus. And I was you found my partner! And I was like, oh, okay, there's something happening here. And then part of it, especially, in Catholic ontology, there is not a separation of body and soul. And a lot of the ways that the straight world describes trans people is woman's body, man's soul, vice versa. And it's that does not feel accurate to my experience of transness. My body is my body. It is how it is being perceived and how I want to shape it in the world. That is kind of what's at play. And being able to mirror and engage in sexuality as an active participant in taking advantage of what my body can do is really impactful. And part of how kink is tied to my spiritual practices, and my spiritual practices are tied to kink. So it is deeply tied to Catholicism for me, but also because my Saint Sebastian art is one of my
It's horny. It's so horny.
And I grew up with a St. Sebastian painting in my household that for whatever reason, my mother was convinced was St. Aloysius, which St. Aloysius was a monk who died of the plague. He was never once tied up and shot with arrows. So this painting was absolutely St. Sebastian. And trying to explain, when I looked into it, and I was like, why is this gay? It's no, just art is horny. That's the only reason why we've taken it over. But it's delightful. And there's so much in the history of playing with bodies, playing with how we're feeling. The idea that an orgasm is a spiritual experience is something that's across many traditions. We can go on with this, but I want to take a minute to breathe. And if someone wants to give me a blue moon, I would be happy to drink that. We're just taking a breather. Because I also want to plant seeds that we will have a portion of this discussion where the audience has the opportunity to ask questions. So I want to plant a seed now that if you have a question, you can think about how you want to phrase it before we have the awkward moment where I silently stare at people. So I'm going to plant that seed, and one of the things I kind of want to ask in a more practical sense, to move from the like theological, big brain stuff to, for people who are here listening to this, in particular, cis people who want to interact with trans people and don't have experience with it and might be anxious about approaching a trans person, what are they going to do? Do you have any tips for how you want to be interacted with?
One thing, I'm a person who welcomes questions, and I guess because I'm an educator, it just naturally comes to me, but I do not like feeling interrogated, and I do not like feeling like I'm answering a rapid fire of questions. So like don't put us on the spot right away like that. Like, treat us like a person first. Ask me my name before you ask me about the other things that I know you want to ask me about. Ask me about how my life is going before you figure out how you want to insert yourself in it, potentially.
That's me.
At one point, I was having a conversation of like, I would rather fuck 20 first-timers than hook up with one chaser, and the Lord sent me 20 first-timers.
Do you regret saying that, or?
It could be better, it could be worse. It's often a moment of conversations in a dark room with loud music, like it's like just an inch. Just like an inch that way. I'm gesturing. Or sometimes just like adjusting them, and then it's like, yeah, we're going. I think when it's most obvious is cis gay men who have not been with anyone transmasculine do not know how to give head to someone like us. They are just trying their best. No, bisexual, really. Bisexual men tend to be like a little more familiar, so they're more confident.
I find, and this is a controversial opinion that I don't mind saying publicly.
Say it.
Women will fake, and I will not. And so some bisexual men have bad habits because they've had partners who have misled them.
This is a call for community care. Everyone who is engaged in receiving in that kind of fashion, stop faking it. Let them know. Did you come? No, it's fine. But that tends to be the biggest issue because, like, when it comes to thrusting, it's really not that different. And I try to like remind people, like, no, you're doing the same thing. It's yeah, like listen, here's my armpit. You know what I smell like? You're into that. We can just continue from there.
I find to touch on the chaser thing, I do a solid mix of chasers and like first timers, in part because I do not personally like actively enjoy teaching an anatomy lesson. So if I'm gonna do that, I want to repeat. So I'm gonna put a little bit more effort in. I don't tend to do true one-night stands. I'm like, no, I want to like develop a little bit of a relationship. And chasers at least theoretically know somewhat what they're doing. It's obviously like a controversial and tricky thing. It depends on what my goals are. If I'm just trying to get laid tonight, I really don't care what your motivations for being here are. As long as our like activity goals are the same, that's fine by me. But some people have bad habits. And at least the gay men who know they don't know what they're doing can take active instruction.
Sometimes.
You can lead a gay man to water. You cannot make him douche.
I also want to note, like, we're also not like monoliths, and we're not representative of monoliths. So like, I encounter sometimes issues with folks who have experience with trans girls, but not one like me, and so they come in with all these assumptions, and they're surprised to like learn there's also manhood at play in my gender and other things at play, and it's not just womanhood, and that also even when it was, I wasn't beholden by what people expected of that either, and so coming in with like a blank slate per individual, like, you know, keep all the things you've learned floating in the back and wait to see if they apply or not, because they won't always.
Right. Well, some of it is like, I often feel bad in that monolith thing. I'm a submissive. And people assume trans men are submissives, which works out great for me, but I recognize whenever I'm playing with people, I'm like, oh, am I reinforcing something? But I also love to get fucked and I'm submissive, so I'm like,
And you also deserve to get off like that.
Right.
Exactly the way you want it.
It really works out to my advantage, but I am cognizant of trying to push back on me. Like, no, there are many ways that we could play, and many ways that you can play with power and things. It just, the stereotype is accurate for me. What about it?
Stereotypes come from somewhere. And like, that's okay. Like, we're very much not a monolith. I'm saying fuck chasers, you're saying fuck chasers. And that's all right. Like, we're all gonna navigate our own thing. Like, I'm very switchy, and I'm also in sex spaces expected more often to bottom, and then sometimes I do because topping takes prep work. I have to bring my bag, I have to bring my headspace, we have to like figure out like, are you ready now? But like, if I'm just at a party, it's like, whatever, we can just go with that.
Right. And there is a huge advantage to
Not having to douche.
not having to douche. Like, I had a scene with some friends that were hanging out, and one of the doms was like, I want to finish, and only one person in this room doesn't need to prep, and no one has prepped, so can I finish in Parrish? And I was like, this is delightful for me. I'm winning here. But I also recognize that, like, that might have made someone else uncomfortable. But most friends.
Uncomfortable or jealous?
And where the other bottoms and that never jealous? Yes.
Because there's also like, bottoming doesn't necessarily mean you're submissive. Like, there are times to be a dommy bottom, there's time to be a submissive top, where you just tell someone it's like, you're just a pole.
Yeah.
And then you go with that. So there's like many ways of going. Like I said, like, I'm very switchy, but I'm a switchy verse, non-binary, bi-ethnic, bilingual, bi-coastal, bisexual. Ironically, I'm very good at that.
Yeah, you can't make me pick shit. Like pangender, pansexual, switch. Like, I'm here for all of it.
I always thought that I'm very, like, compared to people I hang out with, narrow is one of my desires, because I really only attracted to men, and where that line is obviously, like, for example, very wobbly. Of course, the cutoff.
Yeah.
I don't know. But there is something about the, like, then I go and I hang out with my straight friends, and I go, oh, y'all are exploring nothing. There's no communication discussion happening. Because the thing that I think transness kind of helps set you up for with kink, both things teach you the skill set of negotiating before you have to negotiate to be able to have that. You have to negotiate, whether it's negotiating, are you familiar with my body type, or what kinks are we going to do? These skill sets. Hello? Okay, go back. So these skill sets build on top of one another as far as being able to actually have straightforward conversations. And it's a skill that I find non-kinky people, cis people, and straight people at various degrees, the intersection of those three things are not able to do.
Yeah, I work in STI testing, and while we mostly see cis gay men, we do get straight people, and we're like, oh, like, what's your sex life looked like trying to figure out what's happening. And it's like, oh, like, regular? And I just kind of stared at him, and was like, and with a blank stare waited for him, it's like, PIV. I was like, okay, that's fine.
The first time I went to Callan-Lord, which is the LGBT health fair in New York, I was doing a classic new doctor intake, where they're like, you know, are you sexually active? Yes. Who do you sleep with? And I said, oh, I sleep with men. And then the doctor asked, cis men or trans men or both? And I was like, no one's ever asked that, and it's so medically relevant.
So medically relevant. Oh my God, yeah. I didn't think about that.
I had a partner who had a mysterious STI that they could not source, and could not figure out what bacteria it was for the longest time. And being able to communicate to his doctor that he sleeps with trans men, and they're like, oh, there's a whole 50 more STIs we'll test for that are relevant to what genitals you're sleeping with. People don't explore their sexual health enough. And there's a lot of information out there that people aren't sharing. That's a different rant. Because one of the things that, because I teach all these anatomy lessons, I pitched to Claw, Cleveland, Leather Annual Weekend, a class on vaginal sex for gay men. Because that's a huge proportion of the time I'll have men approach me, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm interested, but like, I'm too nervous to actually put on because I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is a comparable concern. Not to say that you have to be interested in or have to sleep with me, but like, if it's just anxiety about not knowing, like, we can work with that.
That's good motivation.
No, I was so thrilled to hear that you were teaching that. Like, they need it. Like, and I think that's like, you know, work like the work that we do in that regard is so important because it benefits all of our sex lives for the potential partners that we'll be encountering down the line. Oh, and I also wanted to make a quick note, just like you mentioned Catlin Lord, and I know that's one of the most popular places for people to go get queer and trans health in the city. I also know folks who haven't had the best experience there, so I do want to offer another place that is really great. It's where I go. I go to Gouverneur Health and Hospitals in Chinatown, and they have a Pride clinic there, and that's where I've gotten all my hormone treatment since I started, and it's been a really smooth ride. I recommend that.
Well, luckily living in New York, there's a lot of options, which is actually wild. I started medically transitioning when I lived in rural Georgia and had to drive 4 hours to Atlanta to get hormones. And like, it's so easy now, I'm spoiled. But I am grateful for that experience because I'm like, oh, I actually know how easy it is, even when I'm dealing with the like BS. Because it's still a community health center, as much as I love it, there are downsides to that process and the limitations of that. So take another minute to breathe, and I'm going to turn to the audience, and I have backup questions, but if someone has a question, now would be the time.
There's actually one thing that we talked about in our pre-planning sort of meeting that we haven't talked on, and it's thinking back to a lot of trans people are kinky, as the gender and the genitals often aren't relevant for whatever activity we're engaging in, and we assign roles to it. And some of the roles that we have the beauty to play with is gender. Like we were discussing force femme, which is like often a sort of hypnosis sort of thing where a cis man is made feminine and oh my God, now you're a woman, and then she might come out later, and that's fine. And more recently, force mask has sort of developed, and it's very like trans masculine targeted of like, I will turn you into a man boy, you will learn how to do these things. And it's like, I kind of want to highlight that like gender can also be a huge part of fetish play. Like if you have daddy's son, ABDL, more letters that express these sort of dynamics, like even if being trans itself is not a fetish, which is not a fetish, it's just like, once a week I have to stick a needle in my ass and I keep doing whatever it is that I need to do because that's what works for me. But it's also like something beautiful that we like can play with, of like playing around with different pronouns within the same scene with the partner. Right. Like obviously like negotiated, but you can also like play around with that. And I just kind of wanted to like bring that up and highlight it of like, do play with these roles on it.
Well, I think it points to, I had a dom I was playing for a bit that was non-binary, and I was reflecting on the language we have for subs is often very gender neutral. You're a whole, you're a slave, you're a slut, like those are not gender. The terminology we have for doms is much more frequently gendered. Daddy, mommy, you know.
Sir.
Mistress,
Master.
Master.
So I was like, hey, what do you want to be called? And they were like, hey, could you, like, I would love mommy and daddy, like, alternating. And I was like, hot. I have done so much internal work to be comfortable with daddy. It is not something I can touch. I have not even touched mommy. I will get back to you. Like, that is not something I'm currently able to do, because it's not one that I thought that I would need to. I will get back to you.
Coach.
Coach.
Coach. Is
Also,
a good one.
chef.
Chef. I know the guest chef.
Not yes, chef.
Hop behind, hop behind. Corner.
Alpha is a pretty good gender neutral.
Alpha's pretty good, but
They're not as good.
It's also like it is associated with that sort of like alpha male, macho culture. It's also like every word only has as much gender as you give it.
Right. Well, and even so much of, and one of my, like, niche things, fetish things I find fascinating is the Omegaverse, which is relatively niche, but it's a fictional universe set of rules that people utilize in various stories where, in addition to male and female, you are also either alpha, beta, or omega. All alphas can impregnate, all omegas can get pregnant. It's huge, it's historically, in gay fiction, there's a fascinating court case where a woman tried to copyright heterosexual Omegaverse as someone who's in the writing world and like trying to copyright tropes, fascinating. But part of it is about like, how do I enjoy a fetish of, I'm a man who could get pregnant, well not more, but like, theoretically. And how do we actually like play and enjoy that in a way that is still gender affirming and male? And then also, how do we nuance gender? Because a lot of the fiction is written by women who are exploring gender dynamics by removing women from the picture. Women are very rarely in this fiction. And it's just like men, but like applying various power dynamics, like alphas are in charge of the world, omegas have no power.
There's also a major fujoshi to trans man pipeline. I do want to say that. Like, I know many transmasculine folks who do a stopover in lesbianism, as they're kind of like trying to figure out their own gender moments. As someone who like figured out that I was attracted to guys before I like figured out that there was like, oh, there's like something I can do about my gender going on.
Oh, like, I'm just a yaoi fangirl.
Like, I was a little too into Ricky Martin and Adam Lambert. But also, in my defense, Ricky Martin.
I mean, yes, absolutely. Do we have any questions from the audience? Do you need a microphone from the audience? Oh, we have one. I'm asking a question.
Cis, and I am curious if there's something that you think that, like a perspective, like your own personal perspective as a trans person, that you think you wish was more prevalent in the broader kink community, that you attribute to being tied to something about your trans identity? Like a good lesson to learn from that or something?
Right. One of the things that I come across a lot in pro bondage is something I participate in pretty heavily. And there are anatomical differences in various bodies and ties that can highlight or don't look right. And it's often talked about in gendered ways. And being able to separate that, in part because there are a lot of ties, shibari ties, are most often demonstrated on women who have tits. There are plenty of cis men who have tits, and the ties will look really nice on them in a way that's not going to look nice on someone who, a cis woman with small tits, or a cis man with small tits. And so to be able to talk about the actual body types and features at play, because there are ties that work really well on a penis. Let's just call it a penis. Or we're talking about the time to the testicles specifically. And it's more informative to talk about where, not just like we're tying to the man's genitals, we're tying it to a dick. We're tying balls. We're tying in a way where I'm not just going to be on a clitoris. And being technical and specific about it, I think, is helpful for everyone. Because it also spells out where on the anatomy am I supposed to put this thing. Like, even amongst genitals, there's a wide range of surface area to work with. Right?
And I think building off
that too, checking in with your a trans partner about like how they refer to their own body parts as, because there's a lot of diversity there. There's some trans men that don't like pussy being used to describe their genitalia, and there's others who do. Same with women, with trans women. There's some who will call our genitalia a clit or a dick or both. I use both interchangeably, but
And people default, like, if you do assumptions, and I find front hole very funny. Happy to use it. If you can't use that in a serious, like, sentence to me.
yeah.
not with that attitude.
No, I mean, yeah, not with that attitude.
Maybe you need to find different doms to try that out.
Speaking on rope bondage, you can also use rope to tie a binder. Like
Ooh, yeah.
going back to like gender as part of the play. Like you can flatten a chest with rope.
Gender affirming rope.
And you can make tits. Like you shouldn't leave it on for 8 hours, but like you can take some photos and be like, well, that was fun. And yeah, speaking on like with navigation, is this picking up?
I think it dropped out.
Just so that it's on the recording. But like when it does come to like speaking on navigation, like when you're trans, sometimes you're like, oh yeah, this is like a go, this area is not a go, and like having that be like chill and okay and not a big deal. I think is very helpful when it comes to kink, because then you can be like, oh, I'm into this and that, and they're just like, well, actually, I'm not into that or this, and I'm just like, hey, I'm really into armpits. Do you want me to shower before I come over? Because I don't wear deodorant. And sometimes they're like, oh yeah, come over, and other times they're like, yeah, you can take a shower. I'm like, cool, that's fine.
Negotiation can happen. And some of it's also acknowledging, as someone who, I will have hookups, but I tend to prefer more sustained relationships. There are things I won't bother to correct in a hookup that I'm like, actually, if we're ongoing, I need you to. I don't like the word pussy. I don't care enough to like a one night stand. I don't want to have that on one night.
Same here. I don't need you to know the intricacies of my gender beforehand for that.
Like we're gonna need to check in and be like, actually, that language you have been using, we're gonna need to adjust.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's also true for things beyond that. In that whole thing of the intersections of kink and things. There are things even in a kink sense that are not about gender where people are like, oh, I'll put up with this, but actually it's not my favorite. I want to be forced to do this. I don't, If you're fine with there being like consensual, non-consent angle to this, we can do this, etc.
I was really fascinated. I wrote down this portfolio. I can't tell what people's genders are, and all I have to do is to check off is community. And I'm really interested on the idea that how you're in a new space, or a space that you are cognizant that operates that allows for public sex to happen. Honestly, like how your relationship to your own body as body neutrality as an idea exists, like as you've been in kink spaces and being in spaces both when you are basically trying to decide whether you're with the community or in terms of like fucking chasers, right? Where you're dictating whether how right you are or how much judgment is present or whether like possibly the house you go through outside of just your personal bodies what other people like really the way bodies have done for your perception of your own
So for me, it's been interesting because one of the main reasons I'm in kink parties is because I'm often booked to perform at them, and so that was like a really fun way to I was really nervous at first to start going to these events, but I'm also being featured in a way where people are there to celebrate and and cheer me on. And I gotta say, there is nothing more satisfying than coming off stage and hearing, we were all owing while you were performing and high-fiving each other while doing it, but also try not to make too much noise to disturb our bottoms, so we were also finger clapping. That's where I've gotten a lot of my euphoria from, because then it's in those kind of contexts, I don't show up to play, even though I'm always told I can after. I'm in full drag. I don't want you kissing me. You're gonna have black lipstick all over you. But it's a really fun way to kind of extend that sort of feeling each other out energy. And so for me, I look at those spaces as like setting foundations, because like Parrish, I'm like, I will do a one-time hookup, but it's not my favorite thing to do. I prefer something ongoing, and I find those spaces like, they especially ones where I don't feel a pressure to play, lend themselves to that.
So one of the things that I experience is I will happily admit, I have a fair amount of internalized transphobia that I continue to work through. And I have historically felt more uncomfortable at Transferno than Inferno, because I can recognize there are things about seeing other trans men's bodies that remind me of my own body that I have not worked through. And so it is one of those where part of what I am navigating in those spaces is it is helpful for me to see trans men interacting and being seen as sexual and having fun and being accepted, whilst also navigating, I don't want to make someone else deal with what my like baggage that I'm actually dealing with. That's not a hot seat for anyone. And so trying to find the balance in those spaces of I'm on my own journey, and this might be like something I'm actively willing to work on and work through, but also this is not baggage I want to bring to a hookup. And so navigating the nuances within these spaces, and it's something that I point to in part because there are a lot of people in public sex spaces that are doing their own version of that. Whether it's someone, a bear, going, oh, I think I'm undesirable as a fat person in a sex space, and seeing someone getting railed who is also a bear is like both affirming and reminding you to kind of sit with those feelings. Is one of the things that I return to. But the double-edged sword of it is I will go to some of these things with non-binary identified assigned male first people who are like, I'm just going to navigate this space as someone else, because it's not, I'll get laid one way, or it's just easier to navigate this space. And so having space for we are any kind of backroom type activity, Virgil is a flattened version of people, because we're only in those spaces to get off, not only, but
Primarily.
And so recognizing that we are interacting with a flattened version of the people we are playing with.
I mean, sometimes like jokes like, oh crap, I left my pronouns at home. Like using non-binary and very much like loving they them pronouns in English. I'm like, oh fuck, I left my pronouns at home. Though I often in the spaces I go to, I'll be like the only trans dude in the room. So in a lot of ways, I'm just like, oh well, that's what this is. People are gonna be into it. Some people aren't gonna be into it. Some people are excited about it. But I think that goes with my like, I don't fuck with chasers mentality of like, I don't want to be somewhere where people are looking to hook up with the trans dude. I just want to be like, oh, well, this is on him. Today we can go. Sort of attitude. Although I was at a different event in that basement, and I was getting a drink. I was like, oh my god, I'm not the only one. And we like had like a moment like, it's good. Hi, nice to meet you. Where are you from? You're not from here. We know you. Then later on, he just goes up and he's like, I'm sorry to be an uncle, but are you in prep? And that was very sweet. As someone who's normally doing that for others.
Well, I think one of the things that you're touching on about like the only one in the space is I'm thinking about, I spent a fair amount of time in Chicago, I live in New York, and Chicago's Steamworks bathhouse, it has only started letting trans people in 2020, and only on every night in like 2021, because they had initially started a trans femme night and a trans mask night, and they still have those. But having been to one, I was the only trans man at trans man night, which pros and cons. But it's also like a Monday night, so who's making their way to the bathhouse on Monday night?
That sounds like a key, no shade.
And so there is a kind of navigation of the space of if you're the only one and people, it's just like a fun bonus for someone who might be into it, versus if you're the only one at trans night, so different class.
follow-up question? Honestly, on the topic of bathhouses, if you were to like imagine or ideate what, because you're talking about like entering a space that already has preconceived systems of interaction, right? If you were to conceive of a new one, honestly, can you outline for me what cruising might look like for a non-cis gay man for you, ideally? In a space that like is programmed for something else primarily, right? Where you are also just speaking to feeling like I can engage with this if it's on my decision, but it's not the thing expected of me, right? Yeah.
One of my friends throws play parties out of his space, and I love a system, and it's often like majority trans people in attendance at these, and some cis folks as well. And what I love how he implemented the cruising system, because there's basically a cruising wall where you get to like write your notes and to share as much as you want about like yourself, like pronouns, identity-wise, but also like what you're looking to experience that evening in terms of kinks or what have you. So, you know, it's set up so that you can just mingle and like enjoy the socializing aspect of it if you want, but if you want to pop over to the wall and participate in that, then all this like groundwork has kind of been set up before the sexy times begin, and I've seen that yield really fun results. I was actually at the first one I went to. I didn't end up playing with anyone myself, but I ended up kind of trapped between a bunch of groups of people all playing with each other, and I had the best voyeur spot in the house. I was the only one who could watch every single scene happening from like both rooms, so that was like a fun experience.
Yeah. So kind of what you're partially touching to, and I run into this a lot at Inferno and Transferno, there, and I'm going to be flattening a lot of nuance in the following statements. There is a very different consent culture in gay male spaces and sapphic spaces.
Yes.
Yes.
Spaces assume you are comfortable saying no. So if I touch your butt, you will move my hand out of the way if you are saying no, and you will leave my hand there if you're saying yes. Sapphic spaces almost have the opposite of you need to have a verbal conversation before you touch me at all, which can lead to, for trans people in various directions, real translation issues of going into, I've seen a lot of trans men go to Inferno and be like, a man just grabbed my ass. And I think there's problems with both issues. I want to be like, yes, and that's gonna be the norm here. Could we find a nice happy medium? That would be great. But if we have to work with the realities of the cultures we're in.
In a lot of ways, and this is just me speaking from like my sort of style, it's like I find that sort of more masculine style appealing versus having like the written negotiation of well, I'm looking for this, that, and that. Because for me, like kink will evolve in a sort of ongoing thing. Like if I'm just encountering someone, it might just be an encounter, and I want to feel desire, and I want to feel desired, and that is something I think gay masculine spaces tend to do well. They look at you like you're a piece of meat, and they start moving towards what they want. Because sometimes you want not to be taken, and sometimes I want to be the one perpetuating that. Right. I'm approaching, I am using this eye contact and like escalating with my hands in order to get consent from you before I take any sort of step. And by the end of it, you don't necessarily need to know my name, but that was the whole moment. And then if I'm getting into, like, if I'm going to get tied up, I need to know very well, I need to have a discussion in safe word. It's like, where are we going with this and how are we coming back versus that. So like, for me, I need a sort of ongoing relationship for kink.
Right.
But when it comes to like just going out and cruising, like, that's sort of like chance encounter and where you both find each other in the same moment.
Yeah.
And even if it is like all cultivated, we are in this venue until 2 a.m. and then please leave.
Right. I have a kind of follow-up question about your thoughts about cruising, and then we do need to wrap it up. But one of the things I don't personally cruise, in part because I really like someone to know ahead of time that I'm trans. I want to be able to at least have like some acknowledgement of that, which is why I like backroom spaces where like I'm naked, you know what you've got to work with. I have a friend who's a trans man who loves like street cruising in P-Town, and enjoys the moment when a gay guy like grabs his junk and goes, "That's not what I was expecting," and I'm like, "That's a nightmare for me." What like do you have experience with navigating that kind of spaces, or is that not really your scene?
Oh no, it definitely happens for me,
Right.
especially when I go to bathhouse sex parties. I'm usually wearing a towel, just because I know like some people are just going to be immediately repulsed by my lack of dick and balls.
Right.
I'm like, that's a them issue, but I also don't want to mess with the vibe, so I let people sort of find out on their own. Especially like I don't have top surgery scars that are recognizable, so it's often people don't realize until they look down and they go, oh! Which is just what it is, but like, as one example, there was, this won't be helpful for the audio, I'm using my hand, but I speak with my hands. Someone who gestured, and he's going down, he's approaching, and realizes it's not there, just kind of retreats. And I was just like, all right, I guess he's not into it.
Right.
He's gonna move on. Then a few minutes later, someone comes in and he is so excited, he brought his boyfriend over. Then the boyfriend brought a friend over. And like, I like, just met this guy. And I was like, I don't even have to do any of the work of cruising anymore.
Right.
It's like a friend came by and was like, is this okay? I was like, oh yeah, we're good.
Right.
So it like, it's gonna happen. I personally have not faced like danger from that. Maybe because it's usually in public settings. Like if we're private, you're gonna find out before you knock on my door.
Right.
But at a venue, like you're gonna figure it out before you get in, and you can always just like move on. I think the kindest reduction I ever got was like someone reached down, that's missing, and he's like, "You're beautiful," and walked away. That was great. I'm gonna leave this dark room very satisfied, but not the way I expected.
And there's so much like nuance of my scars became recognizable in the last 6 years. They were not before, which is a fascinating weird transition for me to go through just as an individual. Because I've been consistent. And the world is changing, which is actually delightful. And I actually do think that the scene is changing very dramatically towards more trans acceptance. And I'm very grateful for that. Acknowledging the time, do y'all have any kind of closing thoughts, as well as things you want to plug? I already plugged my classic claw.
Okay, some things I can plug. So if you want your cards, your tarot cards read, or your astrology chart read, I am your girl. My books are open for that sort of thing. I also do like private life coaching and fuse yoga into a lot of what I do. So if you're looking to explore maybe like gender euphoria, regardless of whether you're trans or cis in that regard, happy to talk and facilitate that kind of work as well. What? Oh, and you can find me at Marisolvibracion on Instagram if you want to talk to me about spiritual stuff explicitly.
All right, and I'm putting it on my calendar because it scares me, but my plug. The next event that I'm hosting is going to be February 27th. We are hosting Into on the 4th Thursday, starting at 10 at Eagle NYC. This month the theme is Impact, so dress for impact, I guess.
Have your ass out.
And next month we will do another trans invasion on our Trans Day of Visibility. I'll come up with a catchy name with that later. I'm also one of the hosts for Tough in Brooklyn on March 7th. Just follow me on anydeviation on Instagram, or you can find me on Facebook at Zephyr.dee. So Zephyr D, but D-E-E.
Can I also mention something I forgot? I also have a suite of like monthly virtual workshops that I host starting this year. So twice a month I host a tarot channeled writing workshop where we're using tarot to actually help inspire us instead of read us. That's on the first and the third Mondays of each month. On the first Wednesday of each month, I host what I call Marisol's Magical Salon, which is a more discussion-based space to learn about all things magical, spiritual, and of that nature. And then on the third Tuesday of every month, I host a queer healing circle where I just kind of combine all the modalities that I use, because we be needing it.
And I'm gonna hand it back to our host, but I wanted to plug that my socials, I'm Parrish Thought on most platforms, PARRISH THETH0T. and that's where you can find me.